Welcome everybody in rangatira tina koutou. Ko tai mai ki te tautoko kaupapa o te rā. No reira tēnā rā koutou katoa. Welcome. Apologies for the late start. We're going to blame the technology because it was the technology's cause, but it was technology. Do we have any apologies? Yes, we have one from Anne Wakefield. Somebody like to move the apologies?
Happy to move from second.
Councillor McPhail and Chairman Horrell. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Beyond the usual? Right. Public forums, we don't have any. Confirmation of minutes, item 5. Minutes of the 15th of February. Somebody like to move that?
Happy to move them.
Councillor McPhail, seconded Councillor Roy. Any changes or corrections? Thank you. I'll put that then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. We have no extraordinary or urgent business. Oh, sorry, the adoption of the Climate Change Subcommittee. We'll move those and then perhaps if there are any comments from those. Thank you, Councillor Rodway, and seconded Councillor McDonald. Any comment necessary? Shouldn't be. No, great. Move those then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, this time, questions. Councillor Rodway, you had a question, but you're happy for it to come up in the next item, yes? Thank you. Yep. So that takes us to the chairman and councillors' reports. I don't have any particularly, but I think we do have some from councillors. So, Councillor Morrison, would you like to speak to your email that you have circulated?
Yeah, thank you. As we bed in the work of the regional working group for climate change, we're just getting our processes and the supporting systems in place. So in future, we'll make sure that those notes from those working group meetings get onto the agenda of both the strategy and policy committee as well as the climate change subcommittee. Those are the two committees that seem to have an interest in our work. We've had the first meeting in recent weeks of that regional working group, as the notes that I sent out to the councillors reflect. And our next meeting is on the next week on Thursday, just before Easter weekend. The level of intensity that's scheduled for the next 6 months is is reasonably intense for that particular regional working group, because we realise we're sort of racing the clock a little bit to make sure we get guidance out for the TAs in this council that will support long-term planning efforts between now and mid-year next year. The first meeting was very much focused on establishing relationships and starting to manage expectations. Key thing was we don't necessarily need to be on the all on the same page at the start of the journey, but by the time the regional strategy is delivered, we certainly want to be far more aligned across the TAs and ourselves. But I think we're off to a sound start and look forward to providing further updates as the work progresses.
Thanks, Phil. Any questions from those papers that Councillor Morrison circulated earlier? Just to let you know that those papers will be attached to the minutes of this meeting, because in future those papers will come as part of the agenda. So
there was a question, and one of them was around our comms approach, and it's certainly one that as a group we're going to have to give some thought to, because we will be moving relatively quickly, but we'll probably need to marshal our efforts across the TAs and ourselves to come up with a coordinated public facing communications approach to update where our work is going. Some folk have a greater enthusiasm for that than others. Some are a little bit hesitant to to let the public know too much because we're so early in that work yet. So we might keep our powder dry a little bit until more of an approach and just. And most TAs and ourselves have got 2 governance level people nominated to attend. I think the expectation is if both are available, both will attend. Where possible.
Thanks, Phil. Oh, Stuart.
Kia ora, councillors. Is Department of Conservation on that group? Part of that group?
No, at this stage it's simply ES and the 3 territorial authorities are and along with Tummy as the participants.
Yeah.
I'd suggest there are lots of other ways that DOC will be included while that group gets their mojo together. Probably best left to them. I would think. Quite a lot on. Councillor McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, just wondering, is there a facility to, on thinking of the reporting back from your interagency group, to have like a standing item in this committee when appropriate to make comment whether or not there's significant news or otherwise? That is, we always have that link that's maintained.
Yeah, I think Councillor Morrison's comment about working through the logistics of how that reporting pathway might result in that. We just have to work out the timing of the meetings and which one is the most appropriate. So that's in thought, and then absolutely standing item might be the way to go. Thanks. Chairman Horrell?
Yes, I guess just on the comms and probably what we'll set up with the Mayoral Forum now, where the same reporting goes to each of the entities is probably a good model to actually make sure that everybody's getting the same information at the same time, and you've got some consistency. So we look forward to seeing this multi-agency group make some progress.
Yeah, and telling the same story is going to be really important, isn't it? So, point taken about the comms, Councillor.
Just in regards to the comms, obviously, Councillor McDonald, Gibson, and myself are involved in a workshop with the Gore District Council around climate resilience and around our flood banks and things, and it was a good, just in regards, it was really quite successful. A lot of questions asked, and they were able to answer them. It's actually engaging. We can reach out and get in around the council tables, around other council tables, and keep everybody informed. And this, it's a great. It was a great way to actually, ask all the questions. There's certainly different questions, but we can certainly push what we need to do in regards to dealing with their management of our infrastructures and things in the future too. So I certainly recommend more of those in the future. Everybody in the table.
Talking is key, I would suggest. Any other comments about that report?
It's another report.
Oh, yeah, sorry, anything else about the climate change? Okay, Chairman Horrell, and then Councillor Rodway, did you want to?
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, the item I sent through just a couple of days ago for a report started off with the entire meeting and discussion there about farms being converted into forestry. So I have sent all that, sent out an email that I sent around to everybody, and I won't go through it in detail, but the main thing I think was to try and get across the idea that there is a lot of opposition in the farming community to the conversion of farms into forests, or parts of farms into forests. And Councillor Gibson here, Councillor Gibson's been telling me about some of the issues with that just before the meeting started. So I'm well aware of those issues. Those are beyond my level of pay grade, as they say, but not necessarily for all of us. But I think one of the things I'd like to emphasise out of all is the 2 things. One is that there should be a more positive attitude to planting trees on land that is currently farmland, but needs to be converted because of the savings that can be made to our carbon budget for the whole country, for ourselves, for the whole country. And there's a lot of negative publicity about that at the moment, and I don't think it's very helpful. It's not helpful for us as a country. And it's not helpful for farmers in particular, because if that continues, then the people that we sell our produce to will pick up on those messages and start to buy produce from other places that are more likely on the scene. Perception, it may not be reality, but if it's perception, then that's what happens. The other thing I wanted to say was at the end was that we don't have to convert all of our farms into forests to become carbon neutral. We do have to convert some of them, and that's the direction I hope that we would go. The work that the people that are buying whole farms, by the way, being sold by a willing seller, willing buyer. The people that are buying this land in the forest are actually saving the rest of us, the rest of the farmers, from the need to convert so much of their land. So it should be seen as a benefit in that sense. So I realise that it's a very sensitive issue, but I do think that we could be a little bit more positive and look at the positives, and also be, I also recognise the changes to communities that will occur, and so it's a big issue, but it's just something I think we need to perhaps change our stance on a little bit. What's the purpose of that? Thank you.
Thanks, Norris. Important that we consider all sides of the discussion. I've got Robert, Councillor Gotton, and then Councillor Gibson, and then Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I entirely agree with Councillor Rodway's thoughts. It's very important that we get our heads around this. And the reason why I'm saying that is that on the way into the meeting this morning, I was listening in the car to Radio New Zealand, and there was an interview with a farmer up in the storm-hit north. And she was making exactly the point that Councillor Rodway is expanding upon now, and the need for planting forests of all sorts. And she talked about the creation of she said humus or organic matter in the soil, and the mitigating effect that has whenever there's a deluge. And I entirely agree with that. And I think that's something along the lines of what Councillor Rodway is talking about. And it seems to me that the only reason why they're talking about that now immediately as an immediate concern up north is because they've been hammered and we haven't yet. And that's why we are fairly lackadaisical in our approach to those issues that Councillor Rodway is talking about.
Thank you. Alistair?
Yeah, I think this is a lesson for us all sitting around this table, and it's all about communication. If the communication and the thing was put out by the authorities that, okay, we only need to plant 10% of our herd, which Mr. Rodway, Councillor Rodway, agrees with, or we can do all these things, then probably the New Zealand farmer would be a lot more agreeable. He's had stuff pushed upon him, and he's saying, well, it's my land rights that I've got here at the moment, and that's what's caused the pushback. So when we're now looking at putting things out here in the form of wetlands and all that sort of thing, we've got to be extremely careful with the message we put out, because this one has been stuffed up.
Chairman Hall.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I've got another report, but I will respond to the current conversation. Look, we know we've got the capacity to plant a whole lot more trees, but at the moment, carbon farming is not regulated, and we actually don't want whole farms planted. I think, talked briefly to Minister O'Connor the other day about whether the NES on highly productive land would be a lever we could pull. He wasn't too sure, but it concentrates on classes 1 to 4. The more I think about it, I would like probably the Southland District Council in the first instance and ourselves perhaps to have a meeting with the industry and try and come up with a voluntary accord. In the past, we've actually had, if you look around the countryside, we haven't got quite the same issues with slash problems because of that accord in the past. We keep away from waterways, and that's worked quite well. And I think that might be a way forward. We want the right tree in the right place, but if you have no regulation, people will plant whole farms right down to the roadsides because it's easy. And I think if you talk to most of the people out there, they're happy to see trees, but they don't want to see whole farms. And once they're in trees, we saw it in the 80s with the eucalypts. There was land in hindsight that probably shouldn't have been planted. We lost schools, we lost houses. We actually want to diversify our economy and encourage people to put the trees in the right place. And I don't think it would take much. And you would see forestry companies would buy a farm, but try and swap that highly productive land, perhaps to a neighbour, and give you more of that hill and gully country. We could have a win-win situation, but no regulation. We know if there was no speeding limits, we'd have issues too. We need some guidance. Second issue, we met with Minister Kerry Allen, who among other portfolios has regional development, on Thursday night and Friday morning. So we're out there for the blessing of the quite impressive sculpture at the end of the airport road of the whale on the tail, which is very good. We then walked down and she had a look at the construction of the pump station at Stead Street, and but yeah, we had some good conversations, and she's certainly somebody who's a listener and is quite proactive.
Thanks, Chairman. We'll just go back to Councillor Pemberton and then Councillor McDonald to finish off there. Councillor Roy as well.
Chair, agree with everything that's been said, but I think we do need to be mindful as a regional council of neighbourly positions, and what I'm hearing is concern around being that neighbour, and I think there does need to be some focus on making sure there's roading access for firefighting, making sure there are buffer zones, and pest control is a massive one. And don't need to go down the discussion of how land pricing's changed and all that, but really it's not up to the pastoral farmer next door to manage this stuff if the person over the fence is making the gain. So that's something that's really got to be dealt with, because that's what really gets under people's skins in those communities is the effect on their property physically. I think as a council we have a responsibility to be reasonably direct on this.
Oh, and considering the investment we've made into wilding pines, the point is well made. Councillor McDonald and then Councillor Roy, and that will tidy up this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. Same as John, I agree with a lot of the talk here, and what Nicole used the word carbon farming. What does that mean? So most trees going into the ground now in Southland will be for production means, but they will be entered into the emissions trading scheme. So they're production and they are carbon farming. I don't know of any blocks that have been planted for permanent carbon farming in Southland as yet. I could be wrong. I probably am, but I'd like to know if there is. And also just want to talk about just to segue onto the latest Synthesis report from the International Panel on Climate Change that Robert's brought up too before. And I think the words were from the lead author of that report: everything, everywhere, right now, or all at once. So we're talking about all the things we don't want to see and we don't want to happen. I think we're getting past the point of those easy decisions are being left behind us. We're going to have to come up with some really confronting decisions to try and find a net benefit in all of this. That's, I think, what we're after. So we're going to have to do some things that we don't like, because I'm afraid to say some of the people I know that are very good environmentalists don't seem to see putting 400 parts per million plus into the atmosphere of carbon is an environmental danger. They're more concerned about pine forests than they are about doing that. So I just think their framing, as the time goes on, their framing of these ideas and their questions that we have will change quite quickly. So, it's a good discussion, I'd just like to say.
Thanks. Councillor Roy, and then we will move on.
Thank you. I wasn't going to participate, but
I feel, well, firstly, Councillor Rodman, you use the word we, I think you're talking about wider Southland and not the council. Because around this table, I think we're all appreciative of actually doing our bit for the climate change thing. We do have a problem with a number of farmers have taken quite an entrenched position against any sort of forestry, and they're doing that because they don't see a national forestry plan. What they see at the moment is the only way forward in the whole climate change debate is sequestering into pine trees. And we've seen some issues around slash, but these are farmers who take objection to big logging trucks going down gravel roads and putting dust in their place and all of that sort of thing. And they are saying we need some more options besides forestry. And so if we can't have more options, we're against forestry. That's the feedback I'm getting. Why aren't we doing some of the other scientific things that should actually be happening? So they're just looking at the negatives and saying this is not the only solution. And they need to move on that. There needs to be some more options that are out there. At the moment, it's just based on pine trees, which is to some degree, in my view, a climate change Bitcoin. There's nothing other than sort of speculation as to how good that is, and the price keeps varying. And at the moment, that is driving change. And so if we had more options on the table, there was a forestry thing that looked at more than just 1 hectare minimum of pine trees, we'd have buy-in, I'm sure.
Councillor Evans just popped in the chat because we're not sure that we can hear him when he speaks. That in response to Morris's comments that customers will seek suppliers with values, which is a very good point, Councillor. I'm just going to throw to Lucy because she's got a comment about some of those suggestions. Thanks.
Thanks, councillors. I think probably from here, I'm happy to take the feedback and the suggestions, certainly from Chairman Horrell, in terms of the measures that we might be able to implement sooner rather than later. We've had a couple of these conversations over the last few weeks, and it's trying to weave together complicated both legislative framework as well as operational ones and comms. So good comms and engagement is really important. And we've obviously got the climate change group, but we've got the pieces of work advancing on regional spatial strategies and plan change, water and land plan change. So there's multiple routes by which we could grip some of these things up. So I think that my suggestion would be, through you, Chair, that the staff take an action from this conversation to have staff level combos with SDC and to bring a paper back to you all with some actual recommendations for where to from here for the short to medium term.
Thank you with that, councillors. And mayoral forum, of course, is not. Yes. Right. Are there any other councillors' report? It's quite a good start to the day. Thank you, everybody, for your conversation. Somebody like to move that we receive those reports, please. Thanks, Councillor Pemberton, seconded Councillor McDonald. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Great. Moving on to item 10.1, the organisational net zero greenhouse gas emission target 2050, which follows on nicely from the conversation we've just had. While the team come up, just a reminder that the recommendations are as follows. Note this update regarding the ongoing climate change and community resilience work programme and associated progress. And 2, set an organisational net zero greenhouse gas target of 2050, noting that further work will be undertaken prior to interim targets, undertaken prior to interim targets being recommended to the Strategy and Policy Committee. So I think that means that we will set some interim as discussed at the Climate Change Subcommittee. But I'm sure Anka will make a better job of explaining that than I have. Thanks, team. Good koto. Technology to catch up on me. The story of the day.
So the first part of the report today is a brief recap on the fact that the interagency group met for the first time on the 24th of February. I think there's been enough discussion about that, but just a comment on Councillor Horrell's comment about one report going back to all councils. That's work in progress at the moment. A draft report has been created that out at the staff level we're all looking at the moment, so that it hasn't worked out for this time round, but that in the future that'll be the way forward. So the staff level group are meeting tomorrow to discuss that, among other things. Yeah, I think we've covered the interagency group well enough already, so I'll just skip on through. Right. Okay, so this is where just a summary of where we got to with the workshop a couple of weeks back, in the sense that we're in the interagency group, we're working through that regional picture, and in the subcommittee side of things, we're working through the internal direction that we need to set up. So the subcommittee meeting was held that same day. The council workshop, really a lot of engagement on the adaptation side of things, and we didn't quite get to talk about the emissions reduction space too much, but the subcommittee covered that off quite well, and you'll be familiar with the resolutions in terms of them being in the minutes attached to your agenda. On reflection of the subcommittee meeting, we were reasonably happy with the balance that the subcommittee direction provided in terms of needing interim targets as the way forward towards a stepping stone of the 2050 net zero goal for the organisation. So where we're at in terms of the long-term plan is essentially where on the left-hand side you can see that our baseline measurement is underway. That's work in progress, and we're hoping that that'll be completed by middle of this year. What we're doing at the moment is doing a lot of work in terms of trying to figure out how our organisational emissions reduction pathway might look like. And what we're wanting to do is set that up in a context of a net zero 2050 goal for the organisation. And so in terms of the slide, the point here is that that'll then feed into the long-term planning process, 2024, 2034. So just a summary, this is the key bullet points from the paper that was attached to the agenda, and in the sense that what net zero is about, we're trying to make sure that as an organisation we're walking the talk, and we're going to cut down our greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. So this will be in line with at the national direction, the fact that nationally we need to be net zero by 2050, and there's also some interim targets nationally as well. Basically, that requires an organisational commitment, and then once that target's been set, we can work through what that actually looks like in terms of how we're going to achieve that. So this is a diagram I showed at the subcommittee meeting as well, which is a really high-level, rough and ready roadmap to how we might get to 2050. Basically, a whole lot of work needs to be done in terms of the how, but we're wanting to do that in the context of achieving net zero target for. So the key discussion points today really is that the net zero greenhouse gas goal of 2050, that's our recommendation. It's, in a sense, it's really a formality lining up with the direction that we've got nationally, that this is what we need to achieve nationally. What we'll do is come back to SMP, this is the direction from the subcommittee as well. The direction is to come back to SMP once the interim goals are researched thoroughly and we understand what they look like as achievable and realistic goals, as stepping stones towards that 2050 goal. And so that's where, that'll come through in the next few months. And that's the next question for probably council workshops too, is how do we take that goal and walk the talk and make it happen. So this is just one last slide to show that some of this thinking is really happening at the staff level. We had a recent workshop and the question was, what actions can Environment Southland take to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions in the next 5 years and achieve net zero emissions by 2050? And a whole lot of ideas from right around our organisation were put up, which are categorised there. The detail's not important here, it's just about the fact that there's lots of ideas already floating around. So this sort of question, like the feedback from councillors, is really important too and valued. Pulling that all together, working out what's the best way forward, which ones will work the best for us as an organisation, and what are we going to do in terms of getting the best bang for buck. It's all work in progress.
Thanks, Eka. Nicely put. Councillor Goshen.
Yeah, no, well done. It sounds like there's lots of action on the ground there. Pace, encouraging. Could I ask, is it possible and is it worthwhile, do you think, for us to see where we align with other regional councils around the country? Is there value in that, or are we so different that really we just have to attend to our own?
We definitely are regional councils, best practice from other regional councils. So we've got an idea that there are certain things that are likely to be the big ticket items that will be the things that will help us reduce those carbon emissions first. And that we're also, in a sense, working really closely with our partner agencies here at the regional level as well. We're Invercargill City Council have already established their baseline, and so learning as much as possible from them. Their organisation is obviously the territorial authority is slightly different to ours, so some of those things will align and some of those things won't. But essentially, some of the big ticket items are likely to be things like EV fleet, increasing online meetings and technology are associated with that, renewable energy, those sorts of things. Oh, and a big one that's come through as well as procurement. So we won't know that exactly until we've got the data on the baseline measurement later this year, around about the middle of this year. But all of that is basically hopefully going to fall into place. Get the numbers, get the way forward, and then put it together as an emissions reduction plan.
Well done.
Councillor McDonald.
I think it's quite good. The words that sort of you get up there, sensible and achievable. It's going to be interesting to see what they actually mean, because we may come up against a hard wall to see things saying before, very, very difficult. But I'd just like to say, really good approach. I can imagine some councils having this discussion and setting an interim target and a 2050 target. It could have been a short discussion in some councils and just put a figure out there, and we'll figure about it later on. I think we're demonstrating a very responsible way forward, which is to show the community exactly what the steps are to be taken, and that's all part of the learning process. So while it would have been easy for us the other day to throw a target out there, I think we're going about it this the right way. So well done.
Just to comment on that briefly, is that it's definitely a learning process for our whole organisation, and I think that's replicated around the community too, in terms of everybody that is having to do some sort of greenhouse gas emissions measurements and then figure out how to reduce. So it's just a whole big community of learning. And we're just one part of that.
Lucy.
Just really quickly to add to Uncle's response to Councillor Guyton and to yours as well, Councillor McDonald. The regional sector is just setting up a new special interest group under the Te Ura Kahika banner, which is what the regional CEOs and chairs group is under as well. So there's a new way for the regional councils to share climate change information in a much more structured way. It's made up of members from across the different technical spheres that regional councils have in regards to climate change. So that's a really good way to, we'll be able to feed back to yourselves in terms of the subcommittee, how and what kind of learnings we are currently sharing from that group as well. They're just getting established. They've had a couple of plenaries, so it's, yeah.
Thanks, Lucy. Councillor Rodway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, following up from what Robin's comment about other councils and what they are doing, I hope everybody's aware of the questionnaire that went out that UNCA organised earlier, and on Monday only 3 people have responded to that as far as I know. So if you haven't filled in that questionnaire or at least read what other councils are doing to get some ideas and feedback, if you haven't done that yet, please do so. The International Panel on Climate Change report sent us an email about just yesterday, is really worth a read as well if you haven't read that. The whole thing is massive, but there is a summary of 36 pages, which isn't too bad, and then there's a smaller summary of the headline statements. So that really sets down why it's really important to do this stuff. I'm sure we know that, but it's very, very good. The other thing about achieving these targets and actually achieving them, and not just saying we're going to achieve them, that's something that the IPCC report comments on as well. But it's going to be very difficult. The last two paragraphs of this report on page 21 start, how can targets be achieved? And it will be difficult to achieve those targets because even though there's lots of good ideas being presented, then as an organisation, we're still going to be, I don't think we can be carbon neutral unless we do some of these things. And sorry to get back to my old tree planting bandwagon, but the council owned land is an excellent opportunity for us to do that. But we have to start soon. Even hardwoods and pine trees don't start accumulating significant amount of carbon until they're about 6 or 7 up to 10 years old. So we need to be, doing this tomorrow or today, not in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, if we're going to meet these targets.
Thanks, Councillor. Chairman Horrell?
Yes, Madam Chair, thanks for that report. And I'm actually very pleased that we are coming up with an action plan rather than just throwing a figure out there. And you see that so often. I look forward to seeing this line of white bikes that isn't clogging Price Street in the future rather than whole vehicles that people complain about. But we do have to have a structured plan, and that'll be good going forward. And I'm afraid the inconvenient truth is that an emission trading scheme that has failed to save the planet so far. It's actually actions on the ground that are going to make a difference, and we will come up with a plan to show that we are walking the walk.
Thanks, Chairman. And Councillor Evans has popped in. He agrees that we need to focus on cutting and reversing emissions. Using offsetting will not make enough change, and the need for good measurements now to have a good baseline to start with. We need to know where we are now to measure improvements as we move forward. Quite so, Councillor. And we are in the throes of doing our own measurements. So it's great. Thank you, Councillor Rodway, for reminding everybody about the questionnaire, because that was what I was going to say. And guilty.
I'll get another one.
Haven't finished filling it in myself, so I'm next on the list. Thank you, Councillor McCann.
Is that greenhouse gas emissions workshop last night, and the new term insetting. Insetting, like you're using your own land, not actually offsetting, as you're dealing within your own what you have in yourself. So that seems to be the new insetting. Offsetting's buying someone out home doing something, but actually, if you've got something you can do on your own.
Great. We'll have to come up with an acronym as well, because we can't have new words if there aren't acronyms.
Yeah, that's a new one I heard.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm assuming from the general tone of the conversation that we are all happy to
With the recommendation.
thank you. Just be clear that there are 2 important parts to that. Thank you, Councillor Rodway, to second it. What's going on? Technology? Okay. So we have the 2 recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Anko. Great work. Okay, item 2. The science update. Data to life and space-time image velocimetry. I was about to launch into some version of Doctor Who, but that's not that kind of space-time continuum. Welcome, team.
All right, I'm Chris Jenkins, and I'm doing this talk on behalf of Michael McDonald, who couldn't be here today. He's attending a Hydrological Society conference, and I might add he's done some stunning work in this arena, and been really at the top of this field. I just need a pointer. So And to talk about space-time image velocimetry and also the Bringing Data to Life project. So space-time image velocimetry, or STIP short, it's a technique that's relatively new. It basically estimates river flow based on the surface velocity of the water. You take 20 or 30 second video, and software is able to, by means of relating it to survey points, estimate the speed of the water across the channel. We do have to have a cross section of the site surveyed either before or after the video is taken, and the specialized software it can process that video, and you can actually do multiple videos and batch process these. So it's a very quick way of getting multiple flow measurements made. So on the slide here, we can see how the software works. We can see a number of survey points along here. The software basically looks at the video moving, and the texture of the surface of the water is tracked using AI. And then you can see here these little red arrows, that's the velocity of the water. So we've got some very fast velocities occurring in this location here. And these velocities are then applied to the cross-sectional area that's been measured earlier or later.
Chris, is it looking at the water, or is it looking at particles of something on top of the water?
It's looking at ripples and waves on the surface, or anything at all that it can track. There are problems if you've got very large amount of glare on the water or wind, particularly during low river flows. So it's very good for high flow measurements, but not so good for low flow measurements. So in terms of the hardware that we need to do this, we can use recycled smartphones, and the site at Piano Flat, it's using an old cell phone with a broken screen. We don't need to be using the screen on this device, so it's actually a very cheap and effective way of collecting this data. We have fixed cameras that can do this, but we can also use drones, which basically do a flyover. They get a much better picture of what's going on. So the flow measurements are a little bit better from drones. We can also use IP cameras, which are slightly superior to the smartphones. And we also need solar or mains power at the site and an internet connection to bring the data back. In the case of a cell phone, it's already got an internet connection. So we have a fixed camera site at the Waikawa at Piano Flat, and also on the Waikawa Stream Park. The Piano Flat site's been running since 2021, and we've got a large number of measurements that have been done at Piano Flat. I believe there have been about 55 high flow measurements at the time we did the presentation. But last week on Tuesday, we got the highest flows we measured at that site, which was a fantastic achievement. We got up to about 240 cumecs. And Michael also took a drone out and got flow measurements on the Reti River at Lumsden, the Irving Stream at Alice Road, and the Otapiri Stream at Otapiri Gorge. So we got a massive amount of information in the day, and at Piano Flat site, we didn't have to have anybody at that location. So you can see from this slide here, it's a little bit hard to see. We've got the truck sitting over here and a cableway where we do our traditional gauging measurements. And you can see here some evenly spaced verticals. This is actually the river channel over here, and the stop banks are over here. Upstream, we have got some water flying in. Just to the next slide here. So this is that same location on the Irving Stream at Alice Road, and you can see this extra piece of information. Besides getting flow data, we've also got a wealth of information. As we can see here, water's coming around the channel, and we've got some information about flooding in the background. we're flying over the river channel here. The drones have to be flown under Civil Aviation Authority Part 101 rules, and we have to use trained staff for that. We've only got a limited number of those at the moment, but we're looking at getting some more people trained up. So the key benefits of using this STIV is staff safety. Staff are not required to be on site for the fixed camera stuff, or even close to the river for the drone flights. In terms of flow rating, we can get very quick development of the flow characteristics, particularly for new stations. And we can target flow ranges, and for us, that's mainly the high flows and places where we've got very limited access. One of those being the Piano Flat site. When the river gets up quite high, we can't actually get to the site to do those flow measurements. We're able to do these measurements with fewer staff, and the fact that we don't require staff to be on site, it's reducing travel and our carbon footprint. It's very flexible. We're able to capture events at night where staff would not normally be able to work due to health and safety reasons. So because these cameras can have infrared, we can capture flows immediately on demand. Previously, we would maybe turn up at work, find a site was in flood, and it was peaking right there, and then we'd have 2 hours to drive to the site, half an hour to get the gear, and we would miss those peaks. We're avoiding that altogether now. And another great thing about this is we can also use these cameras for the Data to Life LTP objective. So here's an example.
Interesting, use video from other people, like send footage to you, you can still do assessment from there.
That's correct. So this STIV can also be used from any video that's been captured, even in the past, as long as we've got a reasonably still image and not too much shake and some points that we can survey onto. We can retrospectively work out those velocities. So it's a very, very powerful thing indeed. Here's an example of that Piano Flat site. We can see here on the left, water over the road and then damage that's been done. I myself have been trapped up there by water over the road for a number of hours. So it's very encouraging that we don't have to do that now. This is an example of the flow gauging that was done last Tuesday. So this video capture was as simple as texting with a letter V to the cell phone on the site, and then take a 30-second video, and then response saying the video has been captured.
Quick question. Could you use this in the ocean as well to track ocean currents?
Not this particular piece of software, but other AI software that's being developed for maybe wave magnitude that could be used. As you can see here, there's some very big texture coming down here. So the AI is just tracking these little like white caps going down there. And here are a number of results. I'm sorry about the yellow colour, it's a bit hard to see. But yeah, you can see there's quite a large number of flows that have been captured since August 2021. And this demonstrates it better. So we can see here the previous highest measurement is this one over here on the 6th of June, 1980. It's only sitting around about just about 120 cumulus or so, I think. Can't quite see those numbers, but we've now got a gauging that's over here. These little yellow marks indicate all of these TIV gaugings. There were 55 of them that had been done at the time of this slide, but now we've probably got another additional 20 up ground in this region here in the last week. So there are some limitations to this technology. One of them being that it doesn't actually capture the river cross section in real time. So in a traditional gauging, we would send a piece of equipment across the river and measure the depth and velocity. During a flood, the bed's changing constantly. So we're making an assumption with the STIV that that bed is staying relatively stable. As mentioned earlier, wind can make it hard to read the surface velocities, especially at low flows. And another thing about STIV is that the surface velocity is not equivalent to the average velocity in the water. So we have to develop a relationship between the surface water and the mean velocity, which involves doing a number of calibration gaugings. And of course, there's some site maintenance that's required, which is regular surveying and lens cleaning. As you can see in that image, there's some spider webs on that. And of course, we need to get permission to fly drones and have trained staff. So I'll talk a little bit about Data Life project now. This is a long-term plan objective to develop innovative data services. So we're looking at capturing almost real-time images at our existing hydrological network. And we want these images to complement the data. So we have as graphs and tables. And by doing this, users will have a much more relatable sense to what the river looks like based on that data and the imagery. So currently we've got sites, which is trial site at Lumsden. It uses a pan, tilt and zoom camera. And we've just installed a site on Waihopai Dam. And the idea of that is to be looking at the structure during flood events. And we're going to be installing sites on the Tower River at Gore and on the Ureti at Three Kings. So this is the trial site at Lumsden. You can see here we've got a camera that can pan and tilt and zoom. It's on a cantilever. It's uses a router and solar power, and it can be activated on demand. Here are some of the images that have been captured, and you can clearly see the value in having a camera. This is the same scene during a flood and during a low flow event. And that's looking downstream, and this is looking upstream at that same location. So we're able to see variations in the river, including clarity. This sort of information can help people decide whether they want to go out and use the river for recreational purposes. Conventional data like tables, graphs, it just doesn't engage the user in the same way. Another really great thing about this technology, this is also at the same site, is that we can now zoom in onto a gauge and check that our recorder is actually reading the same as the gauge board. We've got an image taken during the daytime, daytime on the left here, and then that's at night time. This means that we've got concerns that we don't have the correct readings. We can confirm that. Normally we send a person out monthly to do these checks, but now we can do these remotely without anybody visiting the site, which is a great saving. Another thing too is at the site, staff have not been able to read that gauge board for a number of years because it's on a very, very steep, unstable bank. So, once again, looking at staff safety. I have a small video here showing the camera. You can see it zoom around a little bit. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're not able to access the camera live because part of the hardware known as the switch is not functioning, and Michael was going to replace it on Friday, but we weren't able to get that done. So we got here a planned site. This is already at Three Kings. It's being placed rather high up the river, and you can see the information that we're going to be able to get from that will include like weather, snow line on the mountains, river clarity, and then on the right hand side we can see we've got our recorder site down here, and like we do our cross-section measurements here, we'll be able to do STIV flow there, and also check the location for any risks to staff before they visit the site. And the site that we've installed on the Waihopai Dam, some of the other councils like Horizons, they're using cameras to monitor their structures to make sure that gates are being opened and closed correctly. We've put a camera on the Waihopai Dam. The idea of this being that we can, during a large event, keep an eye on whether debris is getting caught around the trash racks on the upstream side, or if culverts are being compromised. So to summarise, our trials have been extremely successful. We've captured high flow data in conditions that weren't previously possible. This is reducing our need to travel, and effectively it's lowering our carbon footprint and freeing up staff resources for other work. As you can imagine, during flood events, there's a lot going on. We need to consider extending our network to improve efficiencies and also increase our data capture. The imagery is adding a lot of value to our graphed and tabled hydrological data, and it helps to provide a connection to the users and between them and the site. And the Data to Life project and data collection hardware, they can be shared across the projects, and obviously able to monitor council assets such as dams, and we can read those staff gauges remotely, and this is reducing our need to visit the sites.
Thanks, Chris. That's really interesting. I've got Councillor Roy who's been waiting very patiently.
I know when you do the questions.
So now is the time.
Well, can I respond to Councillor Guyton's question about ocean currents? The square kilometre array down at Awarua has got some way that they found that they can get a reflective, very accurate and prescriptive reading and know all about ocean currents down here. So we've got that info. Firstly, now this sounds great and good innovation and using old gear and that stuff. We worried about your acronym. It sounds like something you might have to go to a clinic about. But put that to one side. I, as a fly fisherman, I'm totally dependent on the river flows info that's on Environment South and Site. Do we have people going out and actually physically measuring that stuff, or what does this actually replace that we've got now, which I think is quite, I can't fool it. It's very accurate in terms of what I expect when I read it.
Yeah, so we have people regularly going out measuring flows, and particularly low flow, flows below medium flow, people can actually go out and wade across the rivers, and we're regularly going out and having like our rating curves, which is the relationship between the height and the flow of the river. They're constantly being checked, and this won't replace the low flow stuff, but it will certainly give us a lot more information for the high flow. And we are really lacking a lot of information during those high flows because we've got a limited number of staff, and if we've got flood peaks happening, 15 different locations, we can only send a party of 2 sets of equipment out. We're only covering a very small percentage of that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Pemberton.
Sorry, it's Libra from Sahaba. I didn't miss it, but using AI technology is fantastic, and obviously working with high flows. Can you flip that round for predictions and then use what that prediction would look like overlaid further downstream?
It's not useful for predictive purposes, but more for getting spot data at that point in time. And then that feeds into those rating curves, which is the relationship between height and flow. We already have predictive models that use those flow values. So at the very least, during a flood event, if we did take a measurement and found at Piano Flat, for example, there was 400 cubics and not 500 cubics, somebody could make a change to the curve there and then that would manifest down the catchment as a lower flow.
And also when you view a river, the fact that you're using a camera, not a measure, like so when you view a river, you can visually, you can tell when it's still rising, and you can tell when it's flattening out by the behaviour of the river. You know, if the river looks angry, you can tell it's still rising. And you can sort of, I live on the Matara, so I can visually look at the river and know if it's coming up or going down without having to look at the data. Does that technology overlay into some of that to sort of preempt a bit of what's coming? Rather than just going at point?
At the sites where the cameras are deployed, we do have river level recorders, and we can see to the millimetre that they are rising. So it's the actual video is not particularly useful for seeing if the river's rising compared to the graph data. But you are right, on the rising limb of the flood peak, the river generally has higher velocities and will have bigger waves. After the peaks pass, you still have those big waves, but yeah, they won't be as pronounced, and the velocities will drop off.
Chairman Horrell?
Yes, no, it's very, very encouraging to see the technology we've got, which actually enhances the information we get and safety for the staff, but actually some of that camera footage could be safety for the general public if you can actually see scouring around some of those bridge sites. And I guess, we're getting quite a few calls for more continuous flow measurements, and I guess, well, it's not quite that, it's actually building on the technology we've got. And it probably means that Eric and Morris can say in bed after we've looked at the site, it's not worth going fishing that day.
Councillor Gusson?
We use quite effectively that telephone system that gives us the height of the rivers. And we learn, if it's a given height, we get stuck off a given area and away it goes like that. Is this there to replace that or?
No,
supplement it?
It's not. This is mainly there to get that spot information that feeds into the flow data.
Councillor
We'll start to things on available.
When I worked with Morris here, I said we could be charging the fishermen for this. But I'm always looking for revenue. Hey, for community service, for other regions. This is community service, I should say. It's a fisherman payroll. Have you scoped out, like, obviously it's really impressive and probably from the funding aspect. Have you scoped out what Southern would need in regards to this, the budget, like how many sites and things to actually give you some?
We are going to be doing this in the LTP at the end of the year. But, I would imagine we would want at least 10 sites, flow sites. It's very useful for high flows, particularly flood warning. So the focus will probably be on those flood warning sites. And also we will be able to deploy at sites that don't have an existing flow recorder, just to get some spot data. Some of the large tributaries would be good to put a temporary for a few months. Calibrate the sites downstream to that.
Councillor McDonald?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for that. I just want to pick up on John's point about the AI technology, and one would assume as time goes on and the data starts expanding and the camera can start to recognise pressure, waves or surface water activity, surely that may overtake the need for actually going physically to do data flows. We can see it in the algorithms and I don't know how all this stuff works, I know Phil does, but surely, hopefully, we will be able to get that. He's got an idea of when it's going up and when it's going down, but we can do that through that remote sensing.
As well, there's some new potential technology coming through, which is using as well as image velocimetry for the surface, like potentially ground penetrating radar to actually see below where the bed is. When this technology does eventuate, I'm not sure if it's possible, but that would eliminate the need altogether to have people at the site at some stage. Potentially drones may be able to be automated when laws change in the future. The odd fire.
Thanks, Chris. The fact that there's been so much interest proves just how fascinating this stuff actually is. It's really grateful for your time. Somebody like to move that we receive that. Thanks, Councillor McPhail, seconded by Councillor Gibson. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thanks very much, Chris. Keep up the good work. AI is not all that bad after all. Getting a bad rap from the news at the moment. Right, takes us to item 3, water and land portfolio update. Lucy.
So a little drier to follow that exciting presentation from Chris, but I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Yeah. So I'll just take the paper as read, but it's a standing item to provide an update to council in a public forum about the work that's advancing in the water and land portfolio. So there's a fair bunch that's happening, obviously, but I'm happy to take any questions. I will just add a couple of points. Firstly, since writing the paper, we've had the 6th interim decision from the good judge in the Environment Court was received last Thursday. We are currently working through that, and so are the good team at Wynne Williams for us. So I'll be able to provide a bit more of an update on that when we meet next, but I just wanted to flag with you that that has arrived. The interim decision from last week covers all the points that weren't covered in the 5th interim decision that we got just before Christmas, and directs a whole raft of new pieces and other bits and pieces she wants tidied up. So she, the judge, has provided us a fairly short time frame to get back to her, having consulted with parties on a number of matters. So the team are full tilt figuring out what that looks like and talking to the other parties about what that means. So we've got until before Easter, the 6th is the current time frame for us to respond to the directions within that. I've also mentioned in the paper the sense check on Appendix N, so that's laid down for next week on the 3rd of April. Staff from my team as well as parties have put up experts who will be, it's effectively a closed shop mediation type sense check process. There'll be a facilitator, court appointed, and yeah, we've got until the 19th of April to get the joint witness statement together for that. And then there will be a further hearing where all of those experts are co-empaneled to answer any remaining questions from the judge. Also noted in the paper that we had decision made on the stay of proceedings application, just in case there was questions around that. The application that we made was for all remaining appeal points to continue to progress whilst the High Court makes its determination on our Rule 24 appeal. Probably enough talking to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
You've stunned them. Stunned them with your brilliance, Chairman Horrell.
Yes, in relation to Appendix N, are you able to try and correlate it with the conversations that are going on with certified farm plans, even though you've had to sign confidentiality agreements, which I disagree with completely. But obviously, at the end of the day, we want our own plan to line up with national direction.
Yeah, through you, Chair, we have been working closely to do just that. The judge is very aware of the timeframe of the national regulations coming. We've been having ongoing discussions with the ministry officials, given our participation in the pilot. So as part of the farm plan pilot that we were undertook late last year, that was testing how Appendix N would work within the new system. So there is that correlation point. Just last week, we were talking to the ministry and they commissioned a piece of work to actually get new people to sign NDA. So they employed Insight, who we obviously use for our appeals work, not Matthew McCallum-Clark, but one of the other staff members at Insight, to do the correlation activity between Appendix N and the draft regulations. And so we've got that report this week as well. So yes, both us, the judge and the ministry are very live to the fact that timing wise, we've got to make sure these two pieces are able to talk to each other.
Questions? Would you like to move that reporting? Councillor Rodway, seconded Councillor Gibson, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Item 4 is the Strategy, Science and Engagement Group, Policy and Government Reform Work Plan, including the external agency reports. What a title. Lucy, take it away.
So on behalf of myself and Rachel, and this is our two groups summary report of what we've got on, and also from a program perspective, but also from a change perspective or reform perspective. Again, just a couple of points I noted on my rereading of it late last night. There's a couple of errors. So on your page 35, in regards to hazard management, it should say March 2023. We've almost gotten to 80% of the region has been flown in regards to LiDAR. And on page 38, there isn't a separate item in this meeting about local government reform. That was just left over from the last report that we did, where we did have a separate item. So that's on future fully. But I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the content. And if it's Rachel's things, hopefully I'll be able to do it again.
Councillor McDonald, you're picked up.
Thanks very much. I'm just looking at the group work program, page 36, right at the end. So I do read what.
Or did you just start at the back?
Renew that. Strategic communications, and talked about the Matara drop-in sessions, and Jeremy talked earlier about that meeting that David Alistair was at. So it might be beneficial not only for these drop-in sessions, but to be part of a wider, say, for the Gore District Council, when they have their meetings with their constituents or their ratepayers for certain issues, that we can provide an item in those meetings, a presentation within those meetings. And I know Jeremy kindly volunteered his services for that. I think he'd be the man for the job, Jeremy and Alistair, of course. So just going a bit further than just having our own drop-in sessions, but piggybacking off that, off the end, and that would go for the Southern District Council too.
So through you, Chair, interestingly, just yesterday, Karen and I both were invited to Invercargill City Council's long-term plan workshop that they were hosting. They were wanting input into regional matters. They wanted to hear from us on a couple of regional and environmental matters. So we were specifically invited to go along to that. So we need to do more, was what Karen and I took away. We have to have a bit more of a strategic approach to how we're engaging both with yourselves and connecting the council part of it. But it's good that at least at a staff level, we have got those lines open.
It's quite, just further to that, the meeting did show us that there is a high level of comfortability around the protection that's been offered in the last 40 years to people. So it's going to be a bit hard to get some traction on that, but I'm just trying to think of some ideas.
Important to have that community level as well, right? Chairman Horrell?
Yes, Madam Chair, page 38, I see the review of resource management infringement offences regulations with the March date. Are we submitting on that? It's something that I've talked to Minister Parker in the past about the gap between the prosecution and infringement. And so where is it? Do you know where that's sitting in the draft?
So through you, Chair, we haven't done an individual submission. The compliance monitoring and enforcement SIG, the special interest group that sits in the regional sector, they were pulling together a submission. But I will check in with Donna on that because I hadn't seen where that landed. But we can certainly share because I'm pretty sure they were going to be doing a submission. It was previously seen the details and wasn't concerned. They were heading in the right direction, was what my short version take was. But certainly the compliance SIG were best positioned to be framing up what the response looked like. So, but I can follow up with Donna and come back.
Initially, I think they were talking about going from 1,000 to 10,000. I think we've probably pushed for a little bit more flexibility. It's a bit like the and it's a speeding fine, you could still ask to go to court, but that long litigation progress is expensive and slow, and having more tools in the toolbox would be quite useful.
So we'd have to agree, Chairman, it's quite often a week bus ticket or the other extreme, isn't it?
I have also seen, just sorry, supplementary answer.
Yep.
There is, further edits being considered in terms of the freshwater farm plan regulations and non-adherence to those regulations and the fines that might be associated. So I know that work program is also advancing. So we'll endeavour to get answers to both of those things and come back with a more comprehensive answer.
Thanks for that.
Any other questions? Just one from me about the air plan. The NESAC that still is not out.
So on the NESAC, what we latest intel is that the air quality changes we've been waiting for in terms of likely increased stringency in regards to the PM10 requirements, likely to go to PM 2.5. That's the particulate matter requirements. They're likely to be inserting those in the first version of the national planning framework under the RM reform, which we're anticipating to see in the middle of the year if all goes to plan from a ministry level. How that plays out, we will see. But instead of having an updated separate national environmental standard, they're not going to be tweaking in more national direction. It will be pulled into that national planning framework. Highly likely, but not confirmed.
Okay.
So, but I'm heavily involved in all regional sector discussions about RM reform at the moment, and that,
Gosh, it'd be just nice to have some, knowing as lots of our sector feels. If there are no further questions, would somebody like to move we receive? Thank you, Councillor Roy. Seconded by Councillor McPhail. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Next. Carried, thank you. Keep up the good work, that team. There's quite a lot on. We have no extraordinary or urgent business as far as I'm aware. So we will hear the reasons for moving into public excluded, please.
So moving into public excluded to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage.
Thank you. Somebody like to move that? Thank you, Councillor